song from back in our day. It ain't me, babe. I ain't the one you're looking for.
I don't know what he said.
Doug's good for that. He's a louder one.
And sure enough, if you want to see the projector, you'll have to move over. I don't think you can see it from that angle, but. All right, we got up to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Sean did. Not we didn't, Sean did. He started the introduction for it, and he's been dealing with some some touchy subjects for the last 2 or 3 weeks, so I'm glad it was him instead of me. There's still some more stuff in here, but this one deals with meats offered to idols. Now, I mean, do we have anything at all that would resemble this at all as far as in our lives today? We don't, we don't, I mean, meats offered to idols is not an issue for us, right? I don't think so. But, Paul teaches I used to go down to Curtis's meat place all the time, and I know all of you all did too, but I live close enough that I would start my grill, charcoal, get on my golf cart and run down there and go across the log yard and go get a steak and come back. Time I get back, it'd be ready to cook. And I never did ask Curtis if he'd offered that meat to sacrifice it to an idol before he put it out in the display case. But,
It's a good thing you didn't ask.
but if he had done that, it wouldn't have made any difference to me because of what Paul teaches here in the 8th chapter. If he had done that, it wouldn't have made any difference to me. But for someone who had been practicing worshiping idols and all of that, they would have thought that their faith was weak, and they weren't strong enough to know that eating that meat was participating in, they thought eating it was participating in the worshiping of the idol. And of course, that was not the case. So Paul tells them to, we'll get into that here in just a second. But you have the right to do that, to eat it and not even ask questions about it. But if you get someone sees you doing that and questions you about it, then you're messing them up. You're getting them confused. So anyway, now about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. So I take the attitude that, I'm sorry, there's nothing wrong with eating this meat offered to idols, and if you think it is, that's too bad. That's kind of what he's saying here. Of course, that's obviously not the attitude that they were supposed to have. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. So the person who has the freedom to eat this meat has the right to eat it because God says there's nothing wrong with it. But if they take the attitude of, I'm going to do it, no matter, I don't care what you think, then you don't know what you think you know. It says, as he says in verse number 2, I think. So then about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there's no God but one. So you can Curtis could take it out back and put it up on this big thing and sacrificed it to something or other, and it wouldn't amount to nothing. And it wouldn't amount, to me anyway, or a person who knows different. There's no such thing as an idol as far as it's not anything other than there's only one God. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there's but one God, the Father, from whom all things come, and for whom we live. There is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came, and through him we live. So it didn't matter. It's nothing anyway. It was his problem, but it was nothing to us, because offering that meat to something that didn't even exist didn't make any difference as far as the person who knew the truth about it. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since their conscience is weak, then it's defiled, or it bothers them. It bothers their conscience. Not everyone has this knowledge. Not everyone in Corinth had this knowledge. And of course, you probably get tired of me saying this, but after being there, you kind of get a feel for actually what some of the things, crazy things that went on in their idol worshiping. And hard to imagine that what they were doing and why they were doing it. And I guess the Jews had been offering sacrifices for a long, long time, so the Gentiles decided they'd offer sacrifices to their gods. I suppose is how that all got started. And but when these people had been converted, became Christians, they couldn't get this part of it out of their mind so quickly, at least. It took time to gain knowledge. When you're first converted, there's a lot of things that, you don't just become a mature Christian overnight. You become a babe in Christ, and it takes a little time to grow. Not everyone possesses this knowledge, he says, but food does not bring us near to God. We're no worse if we eat or if we don't eat, so it doesn't make any difference. And again, I'll ask you the question again, if there's anything similar to this that we have in our daily lives. Be careful, he says in verse 9. Be careful. However, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block for the weak. For someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple. Won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? If there's nothing wrong with eating it, why would it bother them if they eat it? But it's going to bother their conscience. So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. I understand that perfectly if this was going on today. If meat was being sacrificed to idols, then certainly you can't get any, you can't teach anything any plainer than that. But can we just mark that out of our Bibles and I don't know. Is there anything at all similar that we can relate this to, I guess?
What about having a drink with a meal? That's one I brought up last week, that some don't bother some people it does.
Having a drink with a meal, okay? All right. You got two things here. First of all, there has to be nothing wrong with it. Eating this meat offered to idols, as far as God was concerned, there's nothing at all wrong with it. So that it has to fit that category first. And I know I know what you're saying, and that's a good example. Has to be nothing wrong with it. And that you have to clarify that first, and that gets to be tricky sometimes. Right? Someone can see you doing that and say, well, okay, Sean's drinking, it's okay for me to drink. I mean, in the past, it's defiled my conscience because I didn't think it was right. But I see someone that I respect doing that, then it's okay for me to do that. Then on and on and on, they become an alcoholic. And I mean, you can go all kinds of places with this scenario. And I guess that's probably a good example. I don't know. But again, the knowledge that you have to do this, there has to be nothing wrong with it. So that becomes a sticking point. Is it all right to have a drink with a meal?
There's a wide opinion on that.
Under the statutes of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, it's all right. It's not illegal.
It's not illegal, no. There's a lot of things are not illegal, right? Yeah, that's true. Is it illegal as far as God? I heard about 3 things at the same time.
I just said that I guess would be considered a matter of opinion if it's.
A matter of opinion. Okay?
Even though it's legal, it can still be wrong.
Even though it's legal, it could still be wrong, that's for sure, yeah. There's a lot of things at this day and time that's become legal, I guess, that is not legal in God's sight, I guess. But it does become a matter of opinion.
Some people can gamble and it doesn't bother them. They can do it, but that they influence somebody else and it might destroy them, their family situation.
Okay?
What you gamble.
Well, there could be things like, you know, I know most that don't celebrate Christmas or Halloween, you know, to them in their mind, it's a violation of something. And I understand what they feel like it's violating, you know, then to the next person, it carries no significance, you know, that I look at Halloween and Christmas as just family time, and, you know, I don't give any religious significance to it, particularly one way or the other, and, you know, for some people, it's a big deal. And for some people, they go the other extreme, it is religious, so.
Well, in the verses that we just read, it's talking about they lack knowledge and they have a weak conscience.
Okay.
It's weak conscience. So those people that fall in that category about some of these things, they don't need to be doing it. And, you know, we need to, I think personally that we need to honor that. If there are people that have an uncontrolled affinity for, say, alcohol, and they don't need to be around it. They don't need to participate. They don't know when to stop.
Some people can, I guess. But again, it has to be, whatever you're doing, there has to be nothing wrong with it, obviously. So, and then again, that becomes, as a matter of opinion, the drinking thing, of course, you know, you can go back and forth in the Bible with, you know, they did drink alcoholic drinks because that's how they preserved their wine. They had no way to refrigerate it and things like that. And if you go to Europe, I mean, it's a lot more common than it is here. I was really, really shocked. One of the first things that I remember in Germany, going down the street, they had a manhole cover open, 3 or 4 workers there with whatever on, and they had beer bottles sitting around on the street. That was a little bit of a eye opener for me. I mean, but that was their custom. That's what they did. And I mean, it shocked me.
And I'm like you, the same thing. I took a friend over to a mechanic shop to pick up his old car, and the mechanic that was working on it had his toolbox, and there was a bottle. They had a bottle of beer sitting there, and every now and then he'd take a drink of it, like someone around here would drink a Pepsi or a Coca-Cola.
Yeah, or Dasani or whatever. That's what they did. This was 50 years ago. Now, I don't know what they do today, but that was 50 years ago.
But you did not see, contrary to what my mother would have believed in the day, the streets were not filled with drunks.
No, they weren't.
They did not. They weren't. I'm sure they had alcoholics because they're people like everybody else, but the streets were not filled with intoxicated people. But it's also that they all drank.
Yeah. Well, that's an age-old question, debated in the Bible, and I guess, and then of course the obvious answer is, as Paul says, if it's going to cause somebody a problem, what I'm doing, if it's going to cause somebody a problem, even though there's nothing wrong with it, then I won't do it no more. So I guess that should be our attitude, right? Whatever it is.
Using tobacco,
Okay.
you know?
I never did do that, did you?
I never did it.
See, now we went from preaching to meddling.
Preaching the lines, what we did.
You're using tobacco product.
Right.
It offends people
Right.
anymore. And there's a lot
changes
And
that,
it's better just probably not to do it,
yeah,
if it does offend somebody. I remember Bill Allison talking about that.
yeah.
He said, I used to do things, I quit because it offended people.
You remember 50
Bad
years?
influence.
Right, yeah. You remember 50 years ago when between classes in church, people would go out there and
Yes,
smoke?
Yeah,
You remember that?
you don't see many of that no more.
You don't see less of that anymore. Of course, knowledge has come along, I guess, because of the, people didn't used to think there was anything wrong with it health-wise, I guess, but,
I
that,
think knowledge and attitude and custom, but I tell people that I grew up in a day and age where almost everybody smoked
yeah, that's true.
or chewed.
Yeah.
Everybody did. And now, hardly anybody that I know, that I associate with, nobody does.
That's true. The history of the church is kind of comical. And Kentucky grew tobacco, but it wasn't preached on as hard in Kentucky as it was in other states because of, I guess,
Unless
North
you come
Carolina
here as a
could be,
young preacher from Texas.
and North Carolina could be included in that, I guess. And right, but again, it has to be nothing wrong with it to start with. But if you're doing something that someone thinks you're doing something that's wrong, then the simplest thing to do is don't do it anymore. That's what Paul says. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I remember years ago as a very young person, which I don't know how.
Just a few years ago, right?
Yeah, a couple years. But whatever age I was old enough to be in the adult class with John Rickett talking this exact thing. And I remember somebody saying, well, if somebody thought it was wrong, would you do it, John? He said, no. That was it.
Yeah.
You know, I thought, wow,
That should,
that's pretty impressive that he didn't have any wavering on that whatsoever. And I was like, man, he's probably always gonna be a little bit better than me.
yeah, it's,
Person, human being, a better Christian.
that should be our attitude.
No wavering,
Yeah.
there was
No,
no
that-
black and white on that, no.
That should be our attitude for sure, you know. I taught school a couple of years down to middle school. I mean, had 8th and 9th graders. And we had a smoking area, smoke breaks, 8th and 9th graders. And there was quite a few of them out there. The teachers had to have duty to go out and supervise that, I guess. And
Ron Sarton, when he came here, he told the story when he first started preaching down in Alabama at a small church. There's a couple of little ladies there. They thought it was wrong. He said he and Polly, you might say it's before the day and age of television of any consequence, for entertainment, they love to go to the movies. Well, there's a couple of three little ladies in the congregation. They thought it was wrong to go to the movies. He said, we stopped going to the movies.
you'd have to if you were the preacher in a congregation like that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess if you're involved in something like that and somebody, your fellow Christian thinks there's something wrong with it, and they'll tell you about it, and you say, well, if I can't teach you that there's nothing wrong with it, then I'll quit, I guess. Paul doesn't even say that. He just says, I'll quit. If anything I do is causing to sin, then I'll quit. Anything else you want to say?
Most of us would just prefer to argue.
Just prefer to argue about it.
I don't, we just give in.
What would you say, Lisa?
I said, no, I wouldn't argue, I just give in. Yeah, you're a much better human than me.
I don't know of anybody that likes to argue, do you?
I read verses like that and think about how many churches have split up over the color of the carpet and stuff like that. You know, it's like, man, we can sure make a big deal out of something small when Paul's saying stuff like this. You know,
Yeah.
it's,
You know,
we really miss it somehow.
I guess the killer on a lot of that stuff is tradition. I mean, the things that they argued about 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago and split congregations over are not even an issue anymore. So therefore, it shouldn't have been an issue then too, I guess. But people are people, and if you got traditions and you got customs, and it's hard to deal with, I know.
When you're from the South, you learn how naive and how sheltered you are. Like the first night I was at college, I thought I had seen and heard everything, and I was astounded that things happened in the world like they did. And so when we were in Germany, it was really hard for us to try to explain to our landlords that we were from a dry was. And so, but you know, you can carry anything to extremes. There's
Exactly.
people that do not believe in wearing pants. There's people that do not believe in wearing jewelry. And so common sense has to prevail, but if you're working side by side with somebody and something you're doing is offending them, as a Christian, you have to honor that.
Yeah, Paul makes that very plain, that's for sure, yeah.
And she had made a good point there. I had a couple of kids down the hall from New Jersey in the dorm, and the way they made their extra spending money, Wednesday night at the particular church they went to, they sold beer and popcorn at the bingo game on Wednesday night in the basement of the church. Now, coming from a background in the 50s and 60s from here, and sitting there and looking and them telling you that story, you're sitting there, your first reaction is, you're making that up. But it was true.
It's true, yeah, yeah. I knew nothing about racial issues either, coming from this county in 1970, till I got drafted, and Dan can probably relate to this, and thrown in at Fort Knox with all these people from Detroit and all these black people. And then, man, it was a whole different world. I mean, it was just not, I mean, we had the stone walls and maybe another family or two, and they were just like we are. But it was different. It was an eye opener for me. It was scary to see what some of those people were doing and saying and all that. I never will forget that. Same way when we got to Germany, it was that way over there too, with the black people and the white people. But anyway,
Oh, the black people, I always got along with most of them. It was the Puerto Ricans, and every one of them carried a knife and was quick to pull it out. That's the ones I had to watch out for.
I didn't have any experience with that, I don't think. Well, chapter 9, we got what, 10 minutes, Junior? 8 or 10? Chapter 9 starts off with verse 1 and 2, says, freedom is not the issue. So Paul's been talking about, I've got the freedom to eat this meat if I want to. It's not going to bother me. But freedom's not the issue, he says. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. So we have to go on to figure out what he's talking about. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. So people are going to sit in judgment on you no matter what you do. I mean, some people will find a reason to find something wrong with what you're doing no matter what it is. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles and the Lord's brother and Peter? That's a different story here now. Paul said, don't I have that right? He was obviously being criticized for a lot of things he was doing and maybe even not doing, but he's telling them, I have this right. Or is it only I and Barnabas who lack the right not to work for a living? Others who were preaching, obviously, were being supported, but Paul hadn't chosen to do that, but he's telling them I could if it was right for me to do that. Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat its grapes? Who tends a flock and does not drink the milk? Obviously, no one. Do I say this merely on human authority? Doesn't the law say the same thing? For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. Deuteronomy 25:4. Is it about oxen that God is concerned? I always thought it was. I thought he was protecting the oxen, right? Surely he says this for us, doesn't he? Yes. This was written for us, because whoever plows and threshes should be able to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more? So, I don't know what the deal was, but of course Paul chose not to take any support from them because he didn't want to be criticized for this. But he's letting them know that He had the right to do that. But we did not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. Don't you know that those who serve in the temple get their food from the temple, and that those who serve at the altar share in what is offered at the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. So he shifts gears here real quickly. He's got a lot of things on his mind, as Sean has been going through for the last 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, but he keeps going from one thing to another. And I don't know what prompted, I tried to, well, no one knew, I tried to read a commentary, but I don't know why it prompted him to jump into this subject, because he chose not to take money from them, right? Because he went straight in there as a tent maker and got hooked up with Aquila and Priscilla, and that's what they were doing, and so that he wouldn't have to ask for support.
Maybe some of them, maybe some of the congregation or whatever, was critical of the, maybe they felt like.
I don't know
they
who
took
else
too
had,
much or something.
who else had been preaching there other than Paul at this point in time. Of course, Apollos was there, and I guess maybe some of the pagan temples, those people all got support. I don't know what prompted him to bring this about, but he was being criticized. Even though he wasn't doing it, they were saying you can't do it. You don't have the right to do that. Obviously, reading between the lines, but he tells them, yes, I do. Yes, I do have that right, just like it's part of the old law. I remember as a kid, with my dad with a pair of mules picking corn. They had put a muzzle on the mule. You remember that, Dale? I don't know where I can see that just plain as day. The mules would, so every time they'd stop, they'd reach over and grab an ear of corn off of the next row, of the row right beside of them. So they had this wire muzzle they put on them. I don't know what I thought about that as a kid. I thought that's kind of cruel, I guess, but but when you talk about muzzling the ox, I think about that because I actually saw that, and it burned an image in my mind. But anyway, that's beside the story here we're talking about. What else do you want to say? 3 verses here. Rewards for giving up rights. But I have not used any of these rights, and I'm not writing this in the hope that you will do such things for me. For I would rather die than allow anyone to deprive me of this boast. Paul was proud of it. Proud of the fact that he was able to preach and support himself, so that no one can say you're too sorry to work and you're just preaching because you don't want to work. Have you ever thought about that? Thought of that about anyone? You don't have to answer that. For when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, since I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging the trust committed to me. He was an apostle, and he was a steward of the word, and he had to preach because of what had been bestowed upon him. But he's not saying, I'm not doing it for that cause. I'm doing it voluntarily because I'm sold on it, and I love it. I wouldn't do anything else. What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel I may offer it free of charge, and so not make full use of my rights as a preacher of the gospel. Interesting, isn't it? Paul knew that he would be more successful preaching and convince more people of his sincerity if he didn't ask them for money doing it.
Maybe the Corinthians had been hustled a little bit by religious people doing it for money and calling on it. I don't know.
Probably so, yeah, probably so.
It was a sore subject for them.
I don't know that they had any. Well, there's Jewish temples there, but they were in the minority whenever Paul came. They were in the minority. There was a Jewish temple there, a big one, but there was dozens of pagan temples there. The ruins are still there. You can go over there and see them. They're still there. So, a lot of things were going on over there. A lot of crazy things were going on. Concession versus assertion. We'll look at that one in verse 19, chapter 9 next week. Anything else you want to say? Is everyone out, I guess? Got the lights turned off. It looks dark back here. Who's not had a prayer this morning? Curtis, do you want to say a closing prayer?
Heavenly Father, we're thankful again for this first day of the week that you provided for us, for the portion of help that we have to be able to assemble together, and for the freedom that we have to do this. We hope that everything that we've said and done in our services today has been pleasing unto you, and that we've gained knowledge from being here. Go with us to our homes, watch over and care for us. In Christ's name we pray.
Amen. Thank you all for staying. Thank you for the comments.